February 25, 2022, will forever be etched in memory as the day of the devastating Paria diving incident, in which 4 divers tragically lost their lives after being sucked into an oil pipe. The incident exposed the dark underbelly of the oil industry's safety protocols, leaving a nation grappling with the consequences. As the men descended into the murky waters of Pointe-à-Pierre's berth 6 platform, the weight of their task settled in. Faisal Kurban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagasar, Yusuf Henry, and Christopher Boudram were seasoned divers, but the pipeline's history had whispered warnings. This 30-inch U-shaped giant, which stretched across the seabed like a metallic serpent, had lain dormant for years. Its purpose, to transport oil from berth 6 to the refinery at berth 5, was straightforward, but the risks involved weren't. The team began by securing the area, their movements choreographed by years of working together. The water pressure increased with every meter they descended, and the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the sound of their breathing apparatus and the faint hum of the support vessels above. As they reached the pipeline, Faisal carefully inserted the air tube, and the hiss of compressed air echoed through the water like a warning. The team's eyes met in a fleeting glance that spoke volumes. They knew the potential dangers: gas pockets, structural weaknesses, and the ever-present risk of getting trapped or lost. The pipeline loomed before them, its U-shape a seemingly innocuous curve, but one that held secrets and potential hazards. Kazim's voice was steady as he checked the connections, his words a reassuring mantra in the darkness. Rishi and Yusuf worked in tandem, their hands moving with practiced ease as they secured the pipeline sections. Christopher monitored the air supply, his eyes darting between the gauges and the men. The tension was palpable, a living entity wrapped around their nerves. One wrong move, one miscalculation could have spelt disaster. The team worked with precision, and each step was a testament to their training and experience. Yet, despite their expertise, an undercurrent of unease persisted. It wasn't just the pipeline, it was the unknown, the unseen forces that could have turned this maintenance operation into a catastrophe. As they progressed, the air tube's hiss grew louder, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Faisal's voice came through the comm system, calm and steady. The words of Faisal's voice hung in the water, a challenge and a promise. But then, without warning, the pipeline shuddered. The men's hearts had raced as one, their instincts screaming warnings. What was happening? Was it a gas surge? A structural failure? The questions swirled, but the team didn't hesitate. They knew their job, their lives dependent on swift, precise action. In that moment, the pipeline seemed to transform, its metal skin no longer inert but alive, pulsing with danger. The men's training kicked in, their movements swift and coordinated. They were a team, a finely honed machine, working together to mitigate the risk. But as they worked to stabilize the pipeline, a question hung unspoken. What other secrets lay hidden in the depths, waiting to be uncovered? As the men settled into the diving bell, the 8-foot cube provided a welcome respite from the crushing water pressure outside. Faisal, Kazim, Rishi, Yusuf, and Christopher shed their diving gear, exchanging nods of relief as they prepared to tackle the task at hand. The inflatable plug, which had been installed 2 weeks prior, seemed like a routine precaution, but unbeknownst to the team, it held a deadly secret. The plug's pressurized interior waited silently, a ticking time bomb. The men's hands moved with practiced ease as Kazim handed over a wrench to his crewmate. The sound of metal on metal echoed through the diving bell as they began to loosen the valve. The air was thick with anticipation, the men's breathing steady. But as the valve creaked open, a low hiss whispered through the pipe. The men's eyes met, and a flicker of concern crossed their faces. Something didn't feel right. The hiss grew louder, a menacing growl that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the pipeline. The plug's pressurized interior was on the verge of unleashing its fury. The men's training and experience wouldn't have prepared them for what was coming. The question hung in the air, unspoken. Would they make it out alive?
Yeah. Right behind you, man. All right behind you? You're right behind me? Yeah.
The instant the plug had released, the pipe's interior transformed into a merciless vortex. Air, water, people, and equipment were sucked in with a ferocity that defied comprehension. The diving bell, once a sanctuary, became a death trap as a torrent of water surged in, yanking the men and their tools into the narrow pipeline. The world around them dissolved into chaos. Faisal, Kazim, Rishi, Yusuf, and Christopher were helpless, hurtling through a whirlpool of water and oil for what felt like an eternity. 90 agonizing seconds that had stretched time to its limits. The fight for oxygen became a desperate scramble as the men tumbled through the pipe, their bodies battered by the unforgiving metal walls. The darkness was absolute, punctuated only by the sound of rushing water and the men's own panicked breathing. They were trapped in a living nightmare, unable to control their trajectory or escape the pipe's deadly grip.
Who making all that noises? Come on, all I mean, let's figure it out. We gotta go. We gotta start moving.
The pressure had been crushing, the G-forces overwhelming, as they were propelled through the pipe like rag dolls. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the maelstrom stopped. The men gathered themselves, assessing their positions in the darkness. Miraculously, they found themselves in an air pocket. The gravity of their situation hit them like a sledgehammer. They were trapped, disoriented, and fighting for survival. Panic set in as they realized the extent of their predicament. The pipe's twists and turns had disoriented them, leaving them unsure which way was up or down. The air pocket was a temporary haven, but it wouldn't last forever. They knew they had to act fast, or risk being consumed by the darkness. Christopher Boudrum, one of the men, would later recall the horror of those moments. His voice would tremble as he recounted the screams, the crushing pressure, and the desperate struggle to stay alive.
I was always somebody who could control and see things through, and I feel like I tell her how it's coming back when I feel like.
The men's training and experience had been no match for the pipe's fury. They were at the mercy of the pipeline, and it seemed determined to claim their lives. As they clung to the pipe's walls, trying to make sense of their surroundings, the men's thoughts turned to escape. But the pipe seemed to stretch on forever, a metallic labyrinth with no visible exit. The question hung in the air. Would anyone make it out of the pipe alive? Only time would tell. As the men clung to the pipe's walls, their struggle for survival had only just begun. Trapped in the 200-foot-long oil pipe, disoriented, injured, and consumed by absolute terror, they knew they had to act fast. The darkness seemed to close in around them, the air thick with the smell of oil and the sound of their own labored breathing.
Where you at? I don't know, I'm trying to come up. Trying to come up.
Despite the overwhelming fear, the men tried to communicate, their voices hoarse and strained as they attempted to keep each other's spirits up. But the reality of their situation was crushing, squashing any hope of survival. The GoPro, which had been recording, captured every second of their plight, the sheer terror and sounds of struggle echoing through the pipe like a haunting refrain. The men's minds were racing, their thoughts a jumbled mix of panic and desperation. They knew they had to escape, but the pipe seemed to stretch on forever, a metallic labyrinth with no visible exit. The air pocket that had given them a temporary reprieve was dwindling, and they knew they had to move fast. Chris, his voice shaking with uncertainty, had initially believed they had been hurled through the pipe head first. According to him, they would have had to crawl backward to make it out. But Kazim, Yusuf, and Faisal were adamant they had gone on foot first. Chris had hesitated, then trusted the judgment of the majority. The decision would prove crucial. As the least injured diver, Chris took a deep breath and placed his feet on Kazim's shoulders. The move was precarious, the balance between life and death hanging precariously in the balance. The men's hearts pounded in their chests, their breathing ragged and fearful. As Chris crawled forward, the pipe seemed to stretch on forever. Every inch was a struggle, every moment a test of endurance. The men's screams and cries echoed through the pipe, a haunting reminder of the horrors they were facing. The air was thick with oil residue, making every movement a struggle. The men's eyes had burned, their throats had constricted, and their bodies ached from the injuries they had sustained. But they pushed on, driven by the desperate hope of escape. Their progress was agonizingly slow, and the end was nowhere in sight. Just when they had thought things couldn't get worse, they stumbled upon 2 oxygen tanks with regulators still attached. Chris knew they had to conserve their oxygen, as the air in the pipe was toxic. He had advised the men to take small sips from the tanks to keep clear oxygen in their systems. The oxygen tanks were a reprieve, but the men's relief was short-lived. As they crawled forward, the water level began to rise, threatening to engulf them. Chris's anxiety spiked as he saw his teammates struggling to breathe, their injuries worsening by the minute. Some were pinned, unable to move, and their fate hung precariously in the balance. As Chris crawled forward, he made a daunting decision. He would check just how high the water had risen if they had continued. The thought had sent a shiver down his spine, but he knew it was necessary.
Everything just spinning and beating you up, and it happened so fast. I couldn't react. The only thing I remember able to do was cover my head, like in the fetal position. After that, all I remember, I didn't even remember actually getting pulled in the pipe. I just remember going hurled through the pipe at unbelievable speeds. I couldn't hold my breath no longer, man. Truth. When you're holding your breath for too long, after a while, your body, your lungs just fight. Your airways close, you see a noise. Your body suffering to pull air. An unbelievable nightmare. Your eyes burning. Every time you try to open your eyes, it's burning. You're pitch black, you can't see nothing. Your throat burning. Your ears ringing. Your body sore. And at that point, I tell myself I was going to dead.
Chris's blood ran cold as he realized the gravity of their situation. With only 2 oxygen tanks for 5 individuals, it wasn't safe to proceed any further. Chris knew he had to make a heart-wrenching decision. He would have to continue alone, leaving the others behind to get help. The others looked at him with a mix of fear and desperation, but they knew he was right. They agreed to let him go, and Chris took one of the oxygen tanks, the darkness closing in around him like a shroud. The weight of his decision hung heavy on his shoulders, and the uncertainty of their fate loomed over him like a specter. Would he make it out alive? Would he be able to find help in time? The questions swirled in his mind as he crawled forward, his heart heavy with the burden he carried. With a heavy heart, Chris plunged forward into the unknown, the darkness swallowing him whole. With his diving instincts in overdrive, he conserved every last breath, knowing he had to make his air last. Just as all hope seems lost, his tank collided with something metal. Fate had intervened. Another oxygen tank lay before him. Chris's hands scrambled in the pitch-black darkness, desperate to find the regulator. His fingers closed around it, but his relief was short-lived. The regulator had no mouthpiece. Undeterred, Chris pushed the regulator into his mouth, gagging on the oily sludge that coated it. The taste was vile, like drinking expired motor oil from an old car.
Unbelievable speed. I can hold my breath no longer, man. Truth. When you're holding your breath for too long, after a while, your body, your lungs just fight. Your airways close, you see a noise. Your body suffering to pull air. An unbelievable nightmare. Your eyes burning. Every time you try to open your eyes, it's burning. You're pitch black, you can't see nothing. Your throat burning, your ears ringing, your body sore. And at that point, I tell myself I was going to dead.
The darkness seemed to close in around him, the silence oppressive. Chris clambered through the pipe, his movements slow and labored. Suddenly, he stumbled into another air pocket, the brief respite a welcome relief. But instinct told him he wasn't out yet, he still had to navigate back to the riser. As he rounded a bend in the pipe, Chris's worst fears were confirmed. The section ahead was full of water. But just as he was about to plunge forward, he heard Faisal's voice, faint but determined, calling out his name. Faisal had been following him, and Chris's heart had swelled with a mix of emotions. Faisal asked Chris to wait, but Chris knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. Their time was running out, and every second counted dot. With a heavy heart, Chris knew he had to move on without Faisal. He ensured Faisal had a secure oxygen tank, and with a nod, Chris plunged into the water. The darkness swallowed him whole, and he swam with every last ounce of strength he possessed. Would he find himself at berth 5, sealed off by a plug, or berth 6, their point of origin? As Chris swam upward, the water pressure easing, he finally saw a glimmer of hope. With a Herculean effort, he reached the top of the pipe, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Had he made it? Only time would tell. As Chris recounted the harrowing tale to the medical staff, his words spilled out in a rush, fueled by the weight of his responsibility. He detailed every aspect of the men's situation, from their position in the pipe to the dwindling air supply. But despite his best efforts, the LMCS team had remained skeptical, their faces a mask of doubt. The company's assumptions had been clear. The pipeline was a toxic environment, filled with oil and limited oxygen. According to their calculations, the tanks would only provide an hour's worth of air, and Chris's story had seemed like a desperate fantasy. The team's dismissal had hung in the air, leaving Chris feeling frustrated and helpless. Undeterred, Chris's words had hung in the air, a desperate plea for action. And then a glimmer of hope had emerged. Rescue divers from the LMCS team had volunteered to dive down and search for the trapped men. They had knocked on the pipe, their rhythmic taps echoing through the darkness. The silence had been broken by the faint sound of knocking in response, a reassuring sign that the men were indeed alive. But the challenge remained how to rescue them. As the hours had ticked by, the 4 injured divers had suffered in silence, their air supply dwindling, oil fumes choking them, and seawater rising.
Yusuf! Oh, Yusuf!
days had passed, and the men's screams had gone unheard. It wasn't until days after the incident had begun that the company finally pulled the 4 lifeless bodies from the pipe. The autopsies that had followed were shrouded in uncertainty, with officials unable to agree on the exact time of death for each man. Some had speculated that one of the men had endured until Monday, a haunting thought that lingered long after the tragedy. The official determination had been that they had survived until Saturday, but the doubt had remained. Aftermaths. A commission of inquiry was launched in Trinidad and Tobago to investigate the circumstances that had led to the Paria diving tragedy. Chris Boudrum, the sole survivor, had been called to testify about his experience. As he had recounted the gut-wrenching events, his voice had cracked with emotion.
Everything inside me was hoping a rescue was going on. Nobody was making an attempt to rescue me. You know what I mean?
Reliving the horror of that fateful day. The commission's findings would later reveal a tale of negligence, incompetence, and tragedy. But for Chris, the damage had already been done. The memories of that day would haunt him forever, a painful reminder of the price his friends had paid. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button, share it with your family and friends, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.